How a Janitor Cleaned Out a Bank. The Quiet Heist. In a small, nondescript town, there was a bank that stood as the heart of the community. It was the kind of place where the same people deposited their checks every week, and the teller behind the counter had been there longer than most of the town's residents could remember. But while everyone was busy with their daily routines, few paid attention to the one person who had been quietly moving around them for years: the janitor, an unassuming man named Thomas. Thomas was a quiet man, often overlooked by the bank's employees and customers alike. His job was simple: sweep the floors, mop the tiles, empty the trash cans, and keep the place clean. He moved through the bank with a broom in hand, always in the background, unnoticed. But beneath his humble exterior, Thomas had a mind as sharp as a blade, and he had spent years observing the people who walked through the doors, the vaults, the security systems, and the routines. He had learned things that no one else knew, things that would eventually lead him to pull off the perfect heist. It started innocently enough. For months, Thomas worked tirelessly, always careful to blend into the background. He listened to the conversations between tellers, the way security guards discussed their shifts, and the comings and goings of high-ranking employees. He was a ghost, a shadow who was never seen or suspected. One day, while cleaning the break room, he overheard a conversation between two tellers. They were talking about the new security system that had just been installed. The bank had recently upgraded its vault to include a more complex locking mechanism. Thomas didn't care much about the details at first, but then he heard something that caught his attention. "We've got a 4-day window next week when the vault won't be monitored as closely. They're bringing in a technician to test the new systems, and we'll be short-staffed." This was all Thomas needed to hear. He didn't have any experience with computers or advanced security systems, but he did have something more valuable: patience, and the ability to think several steps ahead. For the next few weeks, Thomas began gathering information. He watched the security cameras, noting their blind spots. He kept track of when the vault was opened and closed, and most importantly, he memorized the schedules of the bank's employees. The more he observed, the more he realized that the vault could be accessed during a brief window late at night when the security guard would be distracted by routine checks elsewhere in the building. The plan took shape. Thomas would need to wait until the vault's security system was temporarily deactivated for maintenance. Then, under the cover of his janitorial duties, he could slip into the vault and take what he needed without anyone suspecting a thing. The night of the heist arrived. The bank was quiet, with only a handful of employees working late on paperwork. Thomas slipped into his janitor's uniform and moved through the building as he always did, blending in with the humdrum of routine. He kept his head low, cleaning the floors, emptying the trash, and taking note of where the guards were. At precisely 1:00 a.m., the vault system was temporarily disabled for its maintenance window. The bank was in darkness, save for the soft glow of security cameras that continued to blink like silent sentinels. Thomas knew exactly where the blind spots were. With the precision of a well-practiced routine, he moved into the restricted area, avoiding the cameras as he knew they would only record movements. He didn't need to be seen. Thomas had spent weeks learning how to access the security door to the vault. He knew the code that was usually input by the security guard was only a secondary precaution. What they didn't know was that he had discovered a forgotten master key in the janitor's closet, a key that could override the system entirely. He'd noticed it when cleaning one afternoon, a rusty old thing that was buried under cleaning supplies. When no one was looking, he had taken it, pretending to be oblivious to its significance. With the vault now open, Thomas entered. The stacks of cash and valuables were just as he'd imagined, easily accessible, almost too easy. He had always believed that the greatest crimes were committed not through violence or force, but through the quiet observation of human systems. The vault, with its intricate locks and expensive alarms, was actually one of the weakest links. He took only what was necessary: a few large bags of cash, enough to set him up for life without raising suspicion. Then, As quietly as he'd entered, Thomas left. He locked the vault behind him, wiped down the surfaces, and left no trace of his presence. The only evidence of his heist was the missing money, money that no one would ever trace back to him. The next morning, the bank employees arrived to find the vault untouched, and everything appeared normal. When the security guard checked the footage, he saw nothing unusual. The janitor was, as always, going about his routine. No alarms had been triggered, and no one had entered the vault. Thomas had simply disappeared into the background once more. In the days that followed, the bank was in a state of quiet confusion. They didn't know how the money had gone missing, or who could have accessed the vault without setting off the alarms. Investigations began, but Thomas, as always, was right under their noses. No one suspected the janitor. Weeks passed, and the bank eventually concluded that the robbery was an inside job, perhaps an employee, or someone who knew too much about the bank's operations. They tightened their security, but by then it was too late. Thomas, now a very wealthy man, moved far away from the town. He continued to work as a janitor for a time, but now it was just for show. No one knew the quiet man who had cleaned their floors had once pulled off the perfect heist. And so Thomas became a legend, his name never spoken, his face never known. He had stolen millions, and no one had even noticed.